wonderful audience, and I do thank you for all the kind words that have been said about me, which seem to be almost an exaggeration. But I have been working for 55 years, so I suppose when you start recounting all the things I've done, it kind of mounts up. What I'm going to do today is to really start this rather long journey. It's 55 years, so do be patient, with some slides. I've tried to make the slides in somewhat of a chronological order, but not quite. So we start right from the beginning, and through the slides, I will give you, try to give you a small narrative of this so-called journey, which continues, I hope. Unlike other people, and many here, artists never retire. So we paint till the end with our boots on. In 1960, I was barely out of college. We just finished our exams, and I got a call from famous Upul, and she said, "Anjolie, I'm taking you to New York with me on the inaugural flight, Air India's inaugural flight to New York." So within 3 days, I was taken off to New York by Upul, and I was 19 years old. And New York was both a revelation and a shock. Unfortunately, I was not so impressed or moved or inspired by the great museums or what I saw, but a trip to Harlem, where nothing had really prepared me for seeing poverty and degradation in a place like USA, which always we had heard was paved with gold. And my American grandmother had always sung hymns about how wonderful America was. And this trip to Harlem really led to a whole series of paintings of the people there, as you see, and this is one of the few paintings remaining. She also introduced me to Edgar Kaufman, who was then the curator of the MoMA, or the Museum of Modern Art. And I had the great privilege and honor of living at the Falling Waters, which was made by Frank Lloyd Wright, which was a which is now treated as a monument in a museum. But I lived there for about 2 weeks, and Edgar Kaufman had this barn full of paints and canvases, and I did a whole series on the black people of Harlem, and this is one of them. Next painting. This is one of my earliest paintings, which I actually did when I was in school. And as you see, in school, Sushil Mukherjee, who was our professor, had really inspired a small group of us students when we were only 12 and 13 years old, giving us oil paints to work with, and letting us look at the few books that he had in his library. One of them, of course, was on Van Gogh and the other Impressionists. So we were very happy to work with this rough surface of the palette knife. So this is one of the earliest paintings. This was a painting of a colleague or of a fellow student called Eliama, and that was when we were in college. She was very dark, but she had this orange underlip, and I did actually several portraits of Eliama. Next. I was very influenced when I finally went to Paris. I've always been considered a maverick in the sense that I seem to go against the stream of what other artists were doing. And instead of getting influenced by Picasso and the moderns, who were very, very important at the time in Paris, and the School of Paris was being established, I was very taken with early Christian art, which I saw at the Louvre and other museums, and was very, very influenced by the stark figure of Christ and the Virgin Mary and Child as seen in early Romanesque art. I felt that much later the imagery of Christ was changed to be much more soft and effete as it is seen, say, in today's iconography that emerges from Rome. But in those days, Christ was shown as a stark figure, the son of a carpenter, very strong, these strong lines and exaggerated hands. And this iconic structure of doing a painting has really remained with me, as you'll see many of the later paintings. This often the single full frontal gaze of the single figure. Next. That is a very early portrait of my two sons, and you can see that they had, it is true, one is dark and one is fair. And you see the sailboats, they were great sailors, the children still are, their children are now, and the little puppy. Next. I started painting the nude very early on, as you saw the first nude, the early nude, and the way I painted the nude changed through the years. You'll see the later ones which were quite different, but these very pale, innocent, brooding nudes were the first that these were from the 60s and 70s. Next. There you can see this is a portrait of Mrs. Gandhi, and I exaggerated the eyes, which were, she had very beautiful eyes, but the mouth was set in a very small, tight line, showing the kind of inner strength that she had. Because while I was painting this portrait, I was commissioned to paint this portrait by, I think, the Tata Collection in Wellington. This portrait of Mrs. Gandhi, and I was commissioned to do the portrait, and when I asked her whether I could paint her or have sittings, she said, well, I'm very busy, I can't do sittings, but you just come with me everywhere I go. And she had a wonderful sense of humor, would crack jokes. But one day she said to me, Anjolie, can I ask you something? I said, yes, certainly, Mrs. Gandhi. She was already Prime Minister then, I can't remember. So I said, yes. She said, could you possibly make my nose a little smaller? So I said, well, I don't think I can do that. And then she was actually quite vain, because the days that I would go for a sitting, and she said, but I haven't been to the hairdresser today, or I haven't had my hair done. And I said, that doesn't matter, I'm not doing your hair today. So that was a portrait of her. Another one, which I painted much later, which turned out to be a little prophetic, was, I don't think it's in this, but it was in a shattered window, and just some days before her death, and that's in the Indira Gandhi Memorial Museum now. Next. That's a very early portrait of myself, and as you can see, when you paint yourself, you're looking like that into a mirror, and then painting, so it's the mirror I'm staring at, and not all of you. Next. That's very early, well, it must have been about 12 or 13. This is called Hyaluronomyticus. Again, I think in the introduction you were told that I was influenced very much by Hieronymus Bosch, and particularly all the creatures that inhabited those paintings. But here the woman stands, and there's the goat that was very much used in those days, but you can also see that her feet are wrapped in barbed wire. So while she is, I mean, the hair represents her need to dream, and it's more lyrical, but her feet are trapped in wire, she can't really move. Next. This was, you see, when I was in Paris as a student, on the way back, a friend of mine, Shama Zaidi, who was actually the director, the script writer for Sham Benegal. So Shama and I were studying together in Paris, and she was studying in Berlin actually. We traveled back overland, and one of the great journeys that we did was through Baalbek and through Pieta. So this was a which was, we were on a dig in Syria. She had an archaeologist friend who allowed us on this dig, and we dug up these ancient shards which were maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years old. And you see a little skeleton or skull there at the bottom as well. But, and then there's a fish, which is a fish floating to the top of the Dead Sea, where we also swam or floated in that marvelous venue. I started painting windows, and there was always, I mean, many critics had said that after I got married, where's my husband? I think he has a lot to answer for, that I felt trapped within the interiors, having been for all those years in Paris and being able to hitchhike, move around, whatever I felt like. Now I was trapped within the interior of a flat in Bombay, and there were always, through the rear window, a view of faraway landscapes, faraway hills. Many critics said that I was yearning to get away, escape, jump through that window and run away, and yet happily trapped within the interiors of this house. Next. And then many things in painting happen through what I call a happy accident. There was an exhibition happening in Delhi, and I was in Bombay, and they said, you have to send us a painting immediately because the exhibition is opening day after tomorrow, someone's coming to fetch it. And there was a painting, and there was no frame. I didn't have a car that day, so I had no time to go and get a frame, so I rummaged in the garage, and I found an old window. And I kind of nailed the painting against the back of the window, and a whole genre was born, the window painting, which I did actually for nearly 15 years. I was painting various types of windows, and many other artists also jumped onto the same idea, and the window as a painting became very ubiquitous. Next. There you see another very ornate window, and in it there is the mother and her two children. This painting was called Toys, and there was quite a big series of toys, and you can imagine that this series took place once I had started having my own children, and though I didn't have a little girl, maybe I was yearning for one, and I have them now, lots of little granddaughters, but I had to wait a long time for that. And there's the woman, and there's always a kite occupying the background or the sky. And there are the toys in the front, the little girl clutching her doll. Next. But when I did many of these window paintings, I started to sort of feel that they were too ornate. And here, this is just one example. I did many of those what we call the Norkhanas, which we got from junkyards in Rajasthan. They always have these 9 sections. This is an abstract painting which I did within a Norkhana, rather than do the usual figurative painting. Next. This is a series, from a series called Horus Road, and this was later on when we were in Bombay, and we were building a house in Bangalore, and I used to go to this Lakkad Bazaar to get doors and windows. That's where I could find all these wonderful old windows. And just next to the Lakkad Bazaar was the red light area, and quite often, by mistake, I would land there and wander around those streets and see those women trapped behind windows soliciting customers. And it was with the great sympathy and compassion that I looked on those women, and there was a whole series done, which I call Horus Road. This is in Sarju Doshi's collection, I think. But it was, again, a bold frontal nude with a woman actually covering her head in shame, but having to bear her body for a profession that she was forced into. Next. This was a painting that belonged in the Tata Collection, and it was somebody in Tata's, this used to hang in J.R.D. Tata's room, and once his secretary phoned me and said, Mr. Tata would like you to come and have tea. So I went there, and J.R.D. looked very embarrassed, and he said, you know, I've always had this painting hanging in my office, and my secretary, well, she was a rather elderly, stern-looking lady, that she doesn't approve of it at all, because when people come to see me, instead of talking to me, they're looking at the painting. So J.R.D. said, very reluctantly, aren't you supposing you were to sort of cut it off about there, would you sign it again? Would you sign it at the bottom? I said, most certainly not, because the whole balance of the painting would change. He said, I'm so relieved you said that, because now I can tell her that, you know, you have refused. So I don't know where the painting is now, but it was in his office many days. Next. There's another of the Horus Road series. And she's hiding her face. There's a curtain hanging that terrible chawl where they all lived, and she is showing herself. Next. Again, you see just the remains of the window, and but this is a fairly recent painting. But we talked a little bit about the crow, because many people have asked why the crow in so many of your paintings. And some people think it's an ill omen, it's an omen of, it's a bird of bad feeling, because it represents dead people and so on. But for me, it wasn't like that at all. It's just a friendly crow. And I used to be painting in a veranda or balcony in Bombay. And Bombay, as you know, doesn't have much wildlife. But this crow represented whatever wildlife there was. And it was this particular crow that would come into the veranda every single day. And one day, he just virtually forced himself into my painting, because he was always there. And I could recognize him. He'd look at me, sort of with his head on one side. The thing is that I do think that the crow is one of the most intelligent animals or creatures, and it certainly is a very urban creature and extremely intelligent. So this particular crow was always a companion, and he came into my paintings and stayed there for nearly 15 years in some form or the other. Next. That again is an interior. I was very fascinated by interiors in places like Horus Road and the Riba. And I think most artists, particularly me, I think I am somewhat of a voyeur. I'm very taken and fascinated by when you go down the street and you see a window, you do wonder what life goes on behind that window. A tremendous curiosity as to other people's lives, what dramas are being enacted behind bars of a window, all those dark interiors. Next. This is a painting called Mataji. I'm sorry, it's a bad slide, but this is in the National Gallery of Modern Art. And this was a very great friend's grandmother, and she used to tell wonderful stories about how she came during partition from Pakistan, and she said all we had brought with us were 8 or 6 pairs of khatia legs, and she said with that we camped somewhere in a refugee camp in Delhi. It's a very prosperous Delhi family, and then I made up those khatias, and that was our only home, those 6 khatias that we camped on. And she was our neighbor in Nizamuddin, and I used to go and visit her every day. She died at the age of 102 or something. And I painted many paintings of her. This doesn't show very well, but in the background there's a sort of a river. And when she became very old, she said, I said, how are you, Mataji, this morning? And she said, us par dekh rahi hu. And she kept saying, I'm looking to the other side. I'm looking to the other side of this river. And I thought that was a very beautiful metaphor for someone who considered that they'd come to the end of their lives and they were yearning to go across that river to one doesn't know where. And she didn't know either, but she was yearning to go now. And she would sit there and knit. Next. That, as you perhaps can see, is the portrait of Ravi Shankarji. And I just did not have the sitar shown, but just the hand plucking the strings of the sitar. Of course, when he saw it, he said to me in Bengali, surely I'm a little fairer than that. So he thought I'd made him too dark. Next. That is a portrait, family portrait of my husband's family. When I went as a bride to Kerala, I was tremendously impressed to find in an old box wonderful sepia photographs from the Colombo Palace and in my husband's family home. And this was from a sepia photograph. You see his mother, you see him, and his sister. Of course, in those days, fortunately, he didn't have a beard, so he looked much more civilized. Next. That is again one of the nudes or semi-nudes. Has painted many of these, often inspired by the very first nude that inspired me was in a place called Autun, which is a Romanesque cathedral north of Paris. And there is this reclining Eve, and she has a look of both innocence and cunning on her face because she has just achieved knowledge of a different kind. And everything that goes with that knowledge was written on her face. And that, I think, feeling of knowing went through many of the nudes that came later. There's a Christ. This is, strange enough, this is an old map that I found. Somebody in Hyderabad had found a roll of these old maps. And they did have little drawings on them, and they had writing in Urdu and little illustrations as well. And they were on a sort of canvas. And I did a series of paintings on these, and this, of course, was Christ crucifix. Next. This is called Shakran Kutti's birthday, and it was again my foray into Kerala and into Kolangor, which is my husband's family place, where little boys, you can see he has a little necklace around his neck. I thought very sweet that they have boys' jewelry, which little boys on their birthday were dressed in a kasava mundu, which is mundu with gold on it, and then they had to be put with jewelry around their necks and then taken to the temple for a puja. And that's how birthdays were celebrated. There was no cake and candles in those days. So this is called Shakran Kutti's birthday. Next. This is actually a portrait of an artist friend, and a device which I often use, which was a portrait within a portrait within a portrait. It was fun to do that because I did that very, very many times, and in many paintings. That's a theme that recurs. You see the painter standing there, and there's a portrait that perhaps he has painted. It looks like a canvas. Of course, the crow insisted on drawing the painting. And around her neck is another portrait in a little medallion. Of course, in the sky there are pieces of paper floating. I was very obsessed with the idea of something that was enigmatic, something that was not always completely stated. And these bits of paper that float are often letters, are often, this is from a diary, a small poem. You can't see the details here, but I think those were poems that were floating. Next. As you can see, I call this the Pieta because the Pieta is, of course, as many of you know, it's a symbol of Mary when she held the dying Jesus, or perhaps the already dead Jesus in her lap. And I did this with Mother Teresa representing Mary, and the dying destitute of Calcutta, which was perhaps, as you can see, he's almost skeletal, but she's holding him in her lap. And it was, the symbolism behind this is that for Mother Teresa, every poor dying destitute came in the form of God, or God came in the form of these people whom she was nurturing and helping, whether it was a baby Jesus in the orphans that she nurtured, or the dying destitutes. The theme of the Madonna and Child has occurred throughout my career as a painter. Sometimes it was just a mother and child when my children were small, and now again when my grandchildren have been small. But here, I also did a series called The Fisherman's Story, or Stories of the Sea, My husband was in the Navy for many years, and we always lived by the sea wherever we were. And then finally, when he retired, we went to Delhi. Both he and I seem to have a tremendous nostalgia for the sea, longing to be near the sea again. And this whole series, there were maybe 20 paintings for stories of the sea, and this is also one of them, where you see the fish hanging and the woman holding her child. Next. This nude was very much like the reclining nude that I talked about, the nude from Husain, the Virgin of Husain. And this again formed part of the series. This was an early one, maybe in the 70s, and I think I have a later one. Next. Yes, there. Now this one, she has, I think this was the influence of some, you've seen some Rajasthani paintings where there's maybe an elephant composed of many figures, or another figure composed of with almost like graffiti all over. And there is, it is again Eve, you see the apple and you see the serpent, but her body is, there's one serpent going around her leg, but her body has something that could be tattoos, it could be mehndi, it is a sort of ornamentation that was added to an otherwise rough figure. Next. There again, the nude with a little animal. I think this is in India Today's collection. They have one exhibition, I think, they really set me on my feet, because one exhibition, India Today bought 7 paintings and they gave me a full spread in India Today. I was quite young then. And that is how perhaps I got to know the good rates in those days. I was very lucky because when I started to paint, there couldn't have been more than 300 or 400 painters in India, and there was no art market as such. And most painters were idealists who painted with art for art's sake, and we didn't really look for either fame or money. But because there were so few of us, I think it came to us more easily than it is coming to young painters today, because there are now lakhs and lakhs of painters in this country, all looking for a place in the sun. So I think luck has played a great part in this being better known and one's work being better known. And so this was part of that first India Today collection. Next. This is a painting called Visarjan, where those years in Bombay when you had you couldn't run away really from the great Ganpati Puja and the Visarjan. Much later, I haven't been much of a believer, certainly never believed much in ritual, but I went last year, surprisingly, without, I don't know why I did it was very impulsive, to the Ardhakund. And I just went out of curiosity, feeling to myself that if I didn't go then, and it is one of the great phenomena of the world, this Kumbh Mela. So I said, let me go and see what it's all about. I had absolutely no intention of taking a dip. It was February, very cold. And then we went out in this boat. I went with some friends. And to my great surprise, I saw a very old lady, I mean she must be 90, actually getting into the water. She didn't shiver or shake. She was praying with great fervor. So I decided that I didn't decide. I just stepped into the water and had a dip. I know that I was drawn to do that by some different force, and it made me believe in something. I'm not sure what it is. I haven't resolved that yet. But clearly, the Visarjan has a great moral force. It is a great moral force. This immersing yourself in holy waters as a sort of cleansing process. I think many religions have it. You have the baptism in Christianity, and this feeling that you must wash yourself. Wash your sins. I don't know whether even sin, but anyway. Next. This is, this was a woman. I've done a series of paintings of her, two children. She was always seen at traffic lights selling a newspaper, and you see it was midday, the newspaper midday, possibly in Bombay, yes, it was in Bombay. And under the grime and filth that she was covered in, and sometimes she would be there in strange garments, which she had probably picked off a dust heap, combining maybe a dupatta from somewhere and a skirt from somewhere else. But under the grime and her dirty hair, she was extremely beautiful. And I used to watch her with beauty and quite often stop and talk to her. And her very sweet little children. And there's another painting of this where the little child in the lap had a very funny hat on its head. And I always stop and I talk to them. And the little boy again in his patched clothes with that beautiful face. Next. That's a portrait of my daughter-in-law and her little son. I have to say here that my daughter-in-law comes from Chandigarh, and we all came here to Chandigarh for the wedding. So we are related to the city in a way. This city is my Sandhi. Next. There again, the theme of families, but particularly this painting is called Refugees. Something that's always terrified me is the idea of being a refugee. I think to me it's, how one has nightmares and fears about things in life. One of the fears has always been of being a refugee, rather than of death, or sickness. The idea that you will be on the move somewhere and the children get lost, you can't find your family, and this is the family trying very hard. You can see how tightly knit they are together. Refugees again. It's a good place to say one thing about the way that I dress my figures. They're never in garments that can be identified in any place or time, because I think I want the figure to be universal, not to say that this is a figure from India or America or Timbuktu. I want them to be in indefinable clothes in sort of an epic way. And this is the painting that I painted many years ago, and the little boy looks exactly like my grandson did when he was a baby, but he was born many years after the painting. So I think I must have wished him to be here on earth, and I must have wished that he would look like that, because I painted him long before he was born. This painting is also used on the cover of the first book on Indian contemporary art, that book by Nilgiris. So for many people it's a well-known painting. Next. That is a painting of my American grandmother who came to India, and she had 6 Bengali sisters-in-law, and you see her in her. It was funny, she lived here for 57 years, and she always wore Western clothes, she always in a dress. And because my grandfather said to her at her wedding, I don't think I want to see you in this fancy dress anymore, because she was in a sari. And the next time she wore a sari was at my wedding. So she always got her clothes out every year. She was very afraid of not being in fashion. But she came out, I think this was in 1905. And she had a wonderful story. My grandfather was the first Indian at MIT, and she was at Wellesley, and they met, and 2 years later, he came out to get a job after he graduated, and his job was to electrification of the Kashmir Valley. And they went in 14 Tongas from Delhi to Kashmir, and there they stayed for the next 5 years, where they had the first 2 children, including my mother. But she always would send for her clothes from America every year. But here you see her looking very frightened in her hat and dress, and her two grim Bengali sisters-in-law sitting on either side of this unfamiliar house with these arches and the curtain with the tassels. And the tiger sitting at her feet represents the terror in her heart. Next. My studio is in Nizamuddin Basti, and around, it's wonderful because it's a village within the city, and it's right there in the heart of Delhi, but it is a Basti, and with all the life of the Basti. And I'm very friendly with the people in the Basti who come in and out of the studio, the kids coming out of the studio, and the goats, if I happen to leave the door open, it's a ground floor studio, they often come in and eat up the drawings, which is a good lesson for me because one realizes that to the goat this drawing has absolutely no value at all, except that it's a tasty morsel. So there's another whole series of what I call the goat people, because they come particularly near Eid, which is a little sad because all those goats that they're bringing and fattening up are going to be eaten up the next day. Next. This is a sad one. This is my painting of Daroda Patia, which you all know about and read about. But I did work for a bit in the camps in Ahmedabad, and the stories that came out of there moved me. I'm not a didactic painter, and I very seldom paint paintings of events, unless I'm particularly moved by it. And in this one, the mother, as you know, as you can see, she's gone, she's dead. And the child is trying to awaken her. The rest of the family lies slaughtered in various, in the background. Vultures are overhead. And the red dupatta really represents the blood. On the floor, you can see not very good detail here, but the bangles, because it was all about the broken bangles of Daroda Patia. Again, solemn nude, but just again the letters flying in the distance. Again, a Madonna child, not necessarily always a foreign Madonna, maybe she is Indian. I think outside you see, I've also done a series where there's Krishna with Yashoda or Parvati with Ganesh. I'm doing in fact a series of important mothers with their children from mythology and from mythology all over the world. Next. This is part of what I call the Open Heart series. There were one or two previous paintings that had it. This was the time that we lived in Germany, and this is both metaphor and a strong feeling that one could not get through to people there. I felt like people were so closed in northern Germany. In 3 years, it was almost impossible to make contact with anybody or get close to anyone. The world was extremely nice and very, very formal. And I went through a period when I just couldn't paint there. And then I asked my husband, I said, give me a ticket, I want to go home for a while. And I came back to India, and I painted 20 paintings in 1 month. And many of them were this Open Heart series, as though I wanted to tear open these people to see what was inside. But also inspired by a very old book that I found, which was a medical book. And it had, have you ever seen those pop-up pictures? And it first pops up and you see the skin, and then you see the flesh, and then you see bones and the organs. And I did feel that one of the most beautiful things is the way the human body and the human organs are so amazingly designed and fitted in to the body. And that's art which only God has made. Which is so perfect. I don't think any artist can match that perfection of design. that forms up the whole human frame. Next. That's a portrait of my son. But he is not, I did a whole series of Nilgiris in Kerala, and this is one of those, but quite often the painting, the portraits or painting that I'm doing resemble the people who are around me all the time. Last week I did a painting and it had a profile in it, and when I brought it home, I realized it was a painting of my granddaughter, which it's unconscious. I hadn't really thought that I would paint his portrait, but it turned out to look just like him. Next. That is a portrait, I think, so you probably recognize O.P. Jain, our great friend. Because during all those times when I was doing the windows, O.P. was my great collaborator as such. He would always bring me these wonderful windows from here and there, and I would paint them, and that is a portrait of him. Which, again, I don't generally ask people to come for a sitting for a portrait, but I paint it from memory, from seeing the person. Often my friends tell me, stop staring, and rather than sketching, I'm staring, trying to take in the features of a person that I might paint. Next. That's another portrait that was in one of the street auctions. Next. When I was, there are several things, I went through painting chairs, and this is a painting of chairs but deconstructed, in the sense that I've broken up the chair into smaller pieces, and then it's been reassembled in a non-logical manner. And even here, when I'm trying to do an abstract painting, the crow has made its presence felt. Next. There again you see one of the chair paintings, but always with a landscape, within a landscape. And I've always generally been, most of my life, a figurative painter, because I find that living in a country which is so people, you can't get away from human contact. And even when I painted a landscape, there's a feeling of the person who has just vacated that landscape. There's just the remnants of a meal, or as you see here, the garment has been left behind, and the crows have come to investigate whether there's anything worth picking up. Next. Here again, there's a chair, and a very architectonic, within an architectonic setting, where both the curtain also looks like a pillar, and there is the small common standing on the side. This was called the Frenchman's house, because there was a French cultural attaché who lived just next to us in Nizamudin, and his house did in fact look a bit like this. Next. This again, I'm sorry, it's not a very good, not in very good color, but it's got very bright green colors, and this was a series of these benches or khatiyas. I painted many of those set in a landscape. This was Kerala, with these very incredible green fields with mountains in the far distance. I like the idea of the horizon, something that is happening beyond, which actually carries on even beyond the frame of the painting. Next. This painting I call Zenobia, and it was inspired by Salman Rushdie's first book, Midnight Student. And that's a wonderful story that he writes, where this young doctor comes back from abroad and he's called upon to examine the various parts of this girl next door, but only through the tear in a sheet. And first he sees her knee through one tear, and then he sees her back, a pimple on her back through another tear, painting of Rajnikant. And that really began a whole series. And we did this exhibition in Bombay of, I think, 40 painted objects. So we went rummaging in the Kabadi Bazaar and in various places in Madras. We found old cupboards, tables, chairs. I did many chairs. and I got an altarpiece, many things we did, and we had this exhibition, I had this exhibition in the Hungary Art Gallery in Bombay with suitcases and trunks. And the nice thing about the exhibition was that everyone who came in started to laugh. Till then, I think we had been very solemn. Indian art went through a period of great seriousness and solemnity where we took ourselves very seriously. But humor and satire were very late to come. And that exhibition inadvertently did start off a trend where I think 3 or 4 months later, Akbar Padamsi and his 3 or 4 friends had another exhibition of painted objects. But I continued to enjoy doing the painted objects, and we had many workshops in schools and colleges where I said, don't get intimidated by a blank canvas. Let's paint a chair or a box or those ugly Godrej cupboards. Those are wonderful because they give you a big space to paint on, and they're in every home and they're so ugly. So we painted lots of Godrej cupboards in schools and colleges. Next. There are some more of the painted objects. And here you see a Veena box, which seems to lend itself very well to bottoms and bosoms. So you see lots of bottoms and bosoms because of its very shape. Funny kind of a table that we found, I still don't know what table it was. Somebody said it's a Panwala's table. And there you see a tailor's dummy, and I cut open a little hole in the chest and inserted a false heart. So it was, apart from enjoying doing it, because the whole exhibition was great fun. But it actually had a rather serious purpose, and that was to bring art down from its high pedestal and make an art that you could actually sit upon. Next. One of these forays into other things was I went for 2 years or 2.5 years to Murano in Italy, where I was actually invited by somebody to work in one of the oldest glass works in Italy, in Murano, where they never let in any outsider, even though a funny Indian woman who arrived in a sari. They were very skeptical at first, but I worked with a wonderful man who was the designer in that. He was the art director of that artworks, glassworks. And I did an exhibition which we called the Sacred Prism, which was, though it was in Murano glass, the themes were mainly Indian. And here, as you see, there's the Ganesh. Next. There is Shivling. They're quite large, they're about that big and they weigh about 8 to 10 kilos. Next. And there was a little baby Krishna with a mukut on his head. Next. There, mother and child are able to see. Next. I was also, my son is a computer nerd, I told him, but he's very angry about that. But he said, you don't realize computers can be so creative. There's nothing as creative as what you can do with a computer. So he actually persuaded me to start working, and this was in 2000. I had this first exhibition of computer-aided artworks, because what is the aim of an artist? It is to produce an image, and especially in today's age, we are very lucky because there's no limit to how we can produce that image. You can cover yourself in paint and roll on a canvas. People are now using digital means much more. But in those days when I did this, it was received with a bit of skepticism in India, though that exhibition did extremely well in New York. That was in 2000. This really was that I was morphing several of my own paintings in this, I can't explain except 3 paintings. You might see just the top of her head at the back, and this woman sitting on a chair, and another, there were 3 paintings morphed together, form one single image. Next. There you get again 3 different paintings to form a single image. There's one painting there with the mother and the boy, there's the head, and then there's New York 89. This was also in a New York exhibition. Next. Here, this again was a computer-aided work, which now hangs in the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi. You see this woman, and this painting is called Mutations. It's the same woman who mutates in different ways. In the last painting, there's a little boy standing next to her, but it's the same little boy who was in the beggar's painting. And in two, she's shown almost as headless. And it is, I think, I don't often paint very strongly feminist paintings, but I think that this one could be classified as making a strong feminist comment. It's very large, it's 6 feet tall, so it's about 12 feet wide. Next. I've decided also, after I've done the painted objects, we talk of the kitsch that we see, whether it's calendar art or the art of the street or the circus or a certain kind of advertising, as we've always thought of it as low art. And in India's quest for roots after independence, when we wanted to find Indian sources, we wanted to run away from the hegemony of Western influence and the colonial influence. But we always seem to look backwards for our sources. Many artists would look at miniatures, they would look at murals, the folk art, but I felt that we should also look at the matrix, the visual matrix of our own times, the art of the street, the art of the calendars, and by isolating some of these images, one was able to bring importance to them. And this, of course, you have, to a certain extent, an image that could have been taken from the kind of Shiva image that you get in the calendar art, but he's wearing glasses. And there is the influence of the circus, where this boy is being cut in half at the circus, and there's a tiger coming out of the box. But also here, I've also used the Tanjore painting technique, where you can't really see it in this painting, but the gold of his specs is like a Tanjore painting, it's real gold, and the saw is made of silver paint, foil. Next, here again, this what I call the engagement with Kitsch, where there's a combination by taking an image from the calendar painting. You see Hanuman flying in the sky, but I see Hanuman over here as the bachelor god, and the woman represents all women yearning for this single male whom they revere. Next, here again, by isolating an image from a calendar work, it gives it importance, because in the calendar art they're so diffuse, there's so much going on that you cannot actually realize that the artists who have painted those are extraordinarily skilled. And it's interesting to know. I have a friend who is actually working with Ridvasi, who is the people who produce this calendar art. You'll be amazed to know that when they choose a painting for reproducing, say it's a Ganesh or a Lakshmi, the print run goes into 7 to 8 lakhs, which is rather much larger than any print run of any book or other kinds of reproduction. And the artist who paints the original has, I mean, we feel that artists, contemporary artists in India have got these huge prices of 40 and 50 lakhs. Those guys have been getting 20 to 30 lakhs for that painting for many years. And the two centers are Ridvasi in Delhi and Shivakasi in the south. Next, here again the ubiquitous tiger, but I've cut him in half and taken out the frame from one of those calendar paintings. Some of these were collages, but many of them were actually painted. So I had to learn a lot to be able to paint the way they do. Well, they're extremely skilled. Next. This again is the idea of the Ardhanarishwara, the half woman, half man, but sort of set in a modern context. And I think in the context of what's happening today, this is equally important today as it was mythologically. Because I often read that men are now being asked to recognize the feminine side, which to the older generation is anathema. I think it's a generation of very homophobic men who think that this is a terrible idea. Next. The only time that I have made a foray into abstraction was with what I call Buddhist abstractions, which were very much influenced by the paintings of the dark, the wall paintings of the dark. And the image of the triangle, which is really usually topped by a small top, which is the head, which represents Bodhisattvas, was very interesting because I feel that the repetition of an image is like a jump. It is by repetition that an image gains power, just as by repetition the litany of a shloka, by repeating it many times, it gains power. Next. This again is from that same series. Again, by isolating certain elements from those paintings, and it brings importance to it. Just as you take a found object and put it on the wall of a gallery, it suddenly gains importance. And here too, this is the feet of the Buddha, which is the painting from the Ladakh series. Next. That again is a painting from the Ladakh series, which actually was in that last Kushi auction in Bombay, and for money. Next. These again are images from the Ladakh series, almost abstractions, but just details out of, but enlarged to a great size. They're quite large, these paintings. There are actually 3 different paintings which have been shown in this single image. Next. This is a mural which is in a hotel in Baroda. You see, art relied so much on patronage, and I've always said that the great patrons of the 20th century were the corporate houses and the hotels. The hotels are the new palaces, the new mansions of this era. There are no more palaces being built, but the hotels and unfortunately the malls are the new palaces of modern times. And they are the hotels, the airports. These are the institutions which actually give artists the space to do large works. And I have done a series of works for the Taj Group. This is the ITC Hotel in Baroda. And it is showing life in Baroda, the life of the street. There's a woman going in a rickshaw, there's the roads, there's a man getting a shave on the street, and people peering out of their windows. And this is large again, this is about 30 feet. Next. This again is a large mural, again inspired by the goats, my goat people, but somebody has pointed out that after I did the work in Murano, several paintings actually were influenced by the glass. The central figure is almost transparent and floating, and there's a figure in the sky floating, which seems to be made of crystal rather than be real. So it's flanked by these real figures, but the central figure is almost levitating. Next. This is the mural that I did which has been acquired by the San Francisco Museum. And the drawings that led up to this, plus some studies for this, were last mural were part of a 6-month solo at the San Francisco Museum. I was very gratified that they actually afforded me a solo, because they never have done this with Indian artists. We've always, as you know, with this great globalization, many Indian artists have joined this global market and have done very well, but we have by and large been ignored by the museums. Of course, I realized that part of the reason for that was large injections of money have to be given to these museums for them to give you a show, or your country must put in the money. And at the same time as I had this show, a bigger show was being put on by the Chinese. And I heard that though they didn't take any money from the Indian government to put on my solo show, they had charged the Chinese some $50,000 for the privilege of having a Chinese artist in the show. But this was one of the first contemporary paintings bought by the San Francisco Museum, because mostly they've always had ancient art only, or been devoted to ancient art. This is really, as you can see, it was about the Kavadiyas. You all must know about these Kavadiyas. And I did a small film also to accompany the thing of these. The idea that they were walking sometimes 500 miles in such devotion and such huge crowds to go and fetch the holy water from Bhadrar and take it back to their own villages. So the whole theme of that exhibition was the Kavadiyas and their journey. One thing that really was, that's not any longer so, but years since this exhibition happened, that whole thing has unfortunately become somewhat politicized, where political parties now have big pandals where they felicitate them and have sort of taken over. But in the old days, it was such a wonderful description of true devotion, where they walked bare feet, they didn't carry money or any luggage, they were fed on the way by devotees, and I thought that was extremely inspiring. Next. This is, we had an exhibition, there was an event called Shakti, which was at the NCPA in Bombay, and Veena Sahasrabuddhe was singing, Alarme Valli was dancing, and I was to do the backdrop. And we hadn't really got together before the event. And on the day of the event, we met at tea just before the opening of the dance performance. And surprisingly, we had all chosen exactly the same theme, which was Saraswati, Durga, and Lakshmi. And here, I show Lakshmi, which is on the right, in her earliest form, which is a form that preceded money. So she was always shown as a lotus, and often just as a lotus and a yoni, because wealth was fecundity, wealth was related to producing both children, crops, and measured only in those terms and not measured in terms of cash. And it preceded cash, so the Lakshmi was not shown as she is in the iconography of the present times. And here I show Durga with a baby Ganesh in her lap, and Saraswati with the accoutrements of power as seen today, where you have the atom and you have, of course, a paintbrush at the bottom, and not only a pen. So there's the veena, the atom, and there's a book and the paint. So all three of us had exactly the same theme in mind, and veena sang and Alarma did this marvelous Bharatanatyam performance against the backdrop of this. Next. Another mural which is about the Janeu ceremony of a little boy. The whole family is there, the Pandits are there. he's about to get his sacred thread. Next. This is a part of the Buddha mural, which is in the lounge, the reception lounge, which the Prime Minister receives foreign visitors in Delhi. It was done many years ago, but I was glad to see when I had this photograph taken that it's still there. And that lounge is now referred to as the Buddha lounge. And apparently many foreign people from Buddhist countries wanted to know who this Buddhist painter was. I was assured that I was not a Buddhist painter, but that I had done this painting. Next. This is a mural in a restaurant called Khyber. And as I was talking about the happy accident in art, and often good things happen out of a bad event. And this restaurant had actually burnt down. And when I was asked to do the murals in the new renovated restaurant, I saw this burnt out wall. And I said, now stop, keep it, don't repair it. I'm going to paint on the burnt out wall, because as an artist you might spend hours and days trying to create the patina of a burnt wall. If you have to do it yourself, it would take many moments. But here, there was this burnt out wall with chunks having fallen out of it. And it's a very large mural. This is only a fragment of. It goes through the whole restaurant. I think 2 of the rooms in the restaurant were painted by Husain, and I did the rest on this theme of Khyber.
Thank you so much indeed for being with us, and bear with us for a few more moments before we conclude the ceremony. As we know, there are so many answers which Anjolie has already given to our questions. We probably would not need too many questions, but we'll still be open for 10 minutes of questions from your side. Then after that we have mugs which we have printed of Anjolie's paintings. She's been very gracefully given us the right to print those mugs, which are on sale outside. And also we have books by Anjolie, and few books, only 3 or 4. I don't know who grabs them. They are also available, and some prints by the National Academy of Art, National Lalit Kala Akademi, which are also on sale.
Good evening, ma'am. Which are the colors closest to your heart?
Well, as you see, there was a strong sort of metamorphosis. I started out with very somber colors, influenced by the icons and Byzantine art. There were usually somber colors with some embellishment, and I had periods where I burst into color. There was a lot more color, but one can't really say, can't really generalize over a period of 55 years of painting, because obviously one's work changes, and I hope it will continue to change. One does not get stuck in a rut. So as you see, sometimes there were the blues that I used a lot. Brown and then light brown was a very favorite color, and the sort of patina which was from a wonderful color called olive green, which the Renaissance painters used to give that very soft evening glow to many of their paintings.
One sees the dominance of nudes, which you just explained also, that sympathize, empathize, and they become a kind of a metaphor. But in some of the paintings, one says that the painting is speaking to you, it's saying a story, and maybe just lifting a bit of the veil or the fabric. It was like maybe there was a strong calling within you to show that, but otherwise maybe the nude was not saying anything extra.
Yes, the fact that the early nudes were full frontal nudes, and later the veil was drawn. Sometimes you could say that the veil was drawn across the painting. Sometimes the veil was removed from the painting. So it's like, is it half a glass empty or half a glass full? But I think those enigmas are very important to my work. that everything should not be revealed. There should be a lot both left unsaid and something left for the interpretation of the viewer. Because it's important to me that the viewer should also identify in some way, as they have over the years. Many times, there was a whole series of paintings I couldn't show. I mean, there's about 5,000 paintings now, so I chose very few. But there was very often when the viewer would, I did a series where a lone woman was sitting on a chair. And it was amazing how many people would come to that show and say, that's me sitting on that chair, alone, you know. So the theme of loneliness certainly found many people who found a chord which they could associate with or identify with. And many other things. Sometimes there would be a broken chair, and I found two people saying they were brother and sister. They were fighting over. Isn't that the chair that was in Grandma's attic in Goa? That chair of which all the entrails had come out, the strings were loose. So sometimes people do identify with those half-covered nudes. Maybe it's a yearning for exposure, or it's maybe a yearning for covering up.
May I ask a question? That's a wonderful talk. It's the first time one has seen your work in terms of from the time you started to the present moment. But there is one thread that seems to link up, despite the fact that the images and the contents change. It's a sense of all the characters or objects which are also characters being of the world yet not of the world. There's a sense of a distance between themselves and what they are representing. I found it a very fascinating kind of quality, or kind of almost like a camera to the whole movement of your work. I don't know whether it is
something about that. It was said in the introduction that I was very influenced by the surrealists, and though my paintings never looked generally like a surrealist painting, one thing, it was a tenet of surrealism which I found extremely exciting very early on in my career, and that was that the dream world exists because you've seen it in the dream, so it's there as much as the real world. And dream and reality coalesce to a certain extent. Reality usually impinges on the dream. Sometimes the dream takes over. But I think that you're very perceptive to see that in many of the paintings, both dream and reality either coexist or one tries to oust the other. That's important though, that the dream state, to be conscious, I mean, what was surrealism about? To consciously become conscious of the subconscious. And the importance of the subconscious in any kind of creative activity is so important. People talk about the struggle of the artist, and often it's mistaken for the struggle in the garret for poverty and not having enough money and all that. We've all been through that as well, because the years in Paris were very, very poor. But the real struggle of the artist is two things. One is to create a signature, which is absolutely your own. And the other is to keep yourself innocent enough and to be able to shed all the baggage of your life in order to always be in contact with that subconscious. And the periods when the muse disappears, it isn't that the muse has really disappeared as some outside force that has gone, but for some reason you've lost the thread to yourself, to the self. And it is from the self, both the conscious self and the subconscious self, that the imagery emerges, and the imagery makes itself manifest.